Imagine catching your husband on a business trip when his watch shows up in another woman's midnight selfie. 7 months pregnant, ex-top litigator Rachel Whitman opens one folder on his laptop, then another, and the life she curated from penthouses and gala smiles shatters. In the next hour, you'll watch a mastermind in heels flip the game. A best friend turned triple agent PI, a live stream confession that detonates a Ponzi scheme, and a letter from a father she never knew that makes her the unexpected heir to a billion-dollar empire, with a morality clause ticking like a bomb. Will Rachel surrender to the narrative her husband writes for her, or weaponize the truth to protect her child and rebuild a legacy from the ashes? Every scene raises the stakes, every ally has a price, and one secret about bloodlines could end careers and families forever. If you love high-stakes twists, courtroom-caliber showdowns, and a heroine who refuses to break, you're in the right place. Hit like to boost the story, drop your boldest prediction in the comments, share with a friend who devours scandal, and subscribe so you don't miss the moment everything flips. Rachel Whitman stood in the floor-to-ceiling windows of their Manhattan penthouse, watching the city wake beneath a blanket of October frost. 7 months pregnant, she cradled her belly through the cashmere dress Marcus had bought her in Milan. Everything about their life was curated perfection. The $8 million apartment overlooking Central Park, the house in the Hamptons, the carefully orchestrated dinner parties where tech moguls discussed changing the world between courses of molecular gastronomy. "You're up early," Marcus said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His cologne, Tom Ford Oud Wood, had once intoxicated her. Now it felt like a mask. "The baby was doing gymnastics," Rachel replied, leaning into his warmth out of habit rather than desire. Marcus kissed her neck. "My little future CEO, already disrupting sleep patterns." He checked his Patek Philippe. "I need to catch the red-eye to Tokyo. The Yamamoto deal won't close itself." Rachel turned to face him. At 38, Marcus still looked like the man who'd swept her off her feet at that Stanford alumni event 5 years ago. Sharp jawline, penetrating blue eyes, the kind of confidence that bent reality around itself. "Another trip?" she asked, trying to keep the disappointment from her voice. "That's the third this month." "I know, baby. But once we close this round, I promise, things will slow down. We'll have all the time in the world for our family." He placed his hand on her belly, his wedding ring catching the morning light. "Everything I do is for you two." An hour later, Rachel stood at the same window, watching Marcus's Tesla disappear into traffic. She pulled up Instagram to pass the time, a habit she'd developed during the lonely hours of her pregnancy. Her former colleagues were arguing cases before the Supreme Court, while she arranged flowers and attended charity luncheons. She'd made her choice, traded her partnership track at Kirkland and Ellis for the role of Marcus's wife. He'd promised her it was temporary, just until the company went public. That's when she saw it. Sierra Cross, Marcus's VP of Operations, had posted an Instagram story from what looked like a hotel room. Champagne on a marble nightstand, city lights beyond. The caption read, "Late night strategy session paying off." But it wasn't the champagne that made Rachel's blood freeze. It was the watch visible at the edge of the frame, a vintage Rolex Daytona with a custom blue face. The watch Rachel had given Marcus for their anniversary. The watch he was supposedly wearing in Tokyo. Her hands trembled as she screenshotted the image before it disappeared. She checked Marcus's calendar on their shared Google account. The Yamamoto meeting wasn't until tomorrow. His flight had taken off an hour ago, but flight trackers showed no red eyes to Tokyo departing JFK this morning. Rachel sank onto the Italian leather sofa, her mind racing through 1,000 innocent explanations. Maybe Sierra had posted an old photo. Maybe Marcus had left his watch behind. Maybe she was being paranoid, hormonal, seeing betrayals where none existed. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and in the soil of her loneliness, it began to grow. She opened her laptop and did something she'd sworn she'd never do. She logged into Marcus's email. He'd given her the password years ago, back when they shared everything. The inbox loaded slowly, each second stretching like an eternity. Most of it was typical: investor updates, term sheets, meeting requests. Then she saw the folder labeled SC Confidential. SC Sierra Cross, The emails dated back 6 months. At first, they were professional, strategy documents, market analyses. Then the tone shifted. Last night was incredible. Can't stop thinking about you. She doesn't suspect anything. Rachel ran to the bathroom and vomited, her body rejecting the truth as violently as her mind did. She knelt on the cold marble, sobbing and retching, while their unborn child kicked against her ribs as if trying to escape the poisoned womb of their shattered family. When she finally stood, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked like a ghost, pale, hollow-eyed, a designer dress hanging on a frame that suddenly seemed too fragile to carry the weight of this betrayal. She called the only person she truly trusted. Sarah Torres, Discreet Investigations, came the familiar voice. Sarah, Rachel whispered, her voice cracking. It's me. I need your help. There was a pause. Sarah and Rachel had been roommates at Stanford before their paths diverged, Rachel to law school, Sarah to the FBI, and eventually to private investigation after a whistleblowing incident ended her federal career. What's wrong, Rach? You sound... I think Marcus is having an affair. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Sarah Torres hadn't changed much in the 15 years since college. Still wore her dark hair in a practical ponytail. Still dressed like she might need to chase someone down at a moment's notice. But her eyes had hardened, carrying the weight of too many cheating spouses and corporate frauds exposed. She sat across from Rachel in the penthouse kitchen, reviewing the screenshots and emails on Rachel's laptop. Her expression remained neutral, professional, but Rachel caught the slight tightening around her jaw. How long have you suspected? Sarah asked, taking notes in a small moleskin notebook. About an hour, Rachel laughed bitterly. God, I've been such an idiot. All the signs were there. The late nights, the trips, the way he's been so attentive lately. Guilt gifts, right? Sarah reached across the marble island and squeezed Rachel's hand. You're not an idiot. You trusted your husband. That's what you're supposed to do. She pulled out her phone. I'm going to run a comprehensive background check on Sarah Cross. Meanwhile, we need to document everything. Finances, assets, communication patterns. If this goes to divorce court, you'll need ammunition. Divorce? The word felt foreign in Rachel's mouth. I'm 7 months pregnant, Sarah. I gave up my career for him. I don't even have my own bank account anymore. Everything's joint, but he controls it all. Which is exactly why we need to be smart about this. Sarah's fingers flew across her phone screen. First rule of investigation, never let them know you know until you have everything you need. Can you pretend everything's normal when he gets back? Rachel touched her belly, feeling the baby shift. I was one of the best trial lawyers in New York. I think I can manage to fool my husband for a few days. But those few days proved harder than any case she'd ever argued. Marcus returned from his Tokyo trip with gifts, designer maternity clothes, Japanese sweets she'd mentioned craving weeks ago. He'd even brought back a traditional omamori charm for protection during childbirth. The attention to detail in his deception was almost impressive. How was Yamamoto-san? Rachel asked over dinner at 11 Madison Park, their usual celebration spot for closed deals. Tough negotiator, but we got there in the end. Marcus raised his glass of champagne while she sipped sparkling water. 20 million Series B funding. We're officially a unicorn, baby. Rachel smiled, the expression feeling like broken glass in her mouth. That's wonderful. Sierra must be thrilled. All her financial modeling paid off. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Yeah, she was instrumental. Probably couldn't have done it without her. That night, while Marcus slept beside her, Rachel stared at the ceiling, feeling the weight of his arm across her waist like a shackle. The baby kicked, and she whispered apologies to the child who would be born into the wreckage of their parents' marriage. Sarah's investigation revealed more than just an affair. Sierra Cross was drowning in student loan debt from Harvard Business School, nearly $300,000. But somehow in the last 6 months, she'd paid off half of it. Her rent had also jumped from a modest apartment in Queens to a luxury high-rise in Tribeca. He's not just sleeping with her, Sarah explained, sliding a folder across the table at their coffee shop meeting. He's keeping her. Look at these credit card statements. Jewelry, trips, shopping sprees, all charged to the company card as client entertainment. Rachel flipped through the pages, each receipt another cut. That's fraud. He's embezzling from his own company. Your company, Sarah corrected. You're listed as co-founder, remember? Even though you've never been operational, legally you own 30%, which I signed over power of attorney to him when I got pregnant. He said it would be easier for the new funding rounds. Rachel buried her face in her hands. God, how did I become this woman? I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford Law. I was on track to make partner before 30. Now I'm a pregnant housewife whose husband is stealing from her to fund his mistress's lifestyle. Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked it, and her expression darkened. We have a bigger problem. My contact at the FBI just flagged something. Marcus's company, it's not just regular fraud. They're investigating it as a potential Ponzi scheme. The Tokyo deal? It doesn't exist. He's been using new investor money to pay off earlier investors, creating fake returns to attract more funding. Rachel felt the blood drain from her face. If that's true, we could lose everything. The apartment, the assets, they could all be seized, which is why you need to file for divorce immediately and separate your assets. But Rachel, Sarah hesitated. There's something else. I had my forensic accountant look at your prenup. It's ironclad in Marcus's favor. In case of divorce, you get a one-time payment of $200,000. That's it. $200,000. In Manhattan, that might last a year with a baby. Rachel had signed that prenup without even reading it, so in love and trusting that the idea of divorce had seemed impossible. So I'm trapped, she said quietly. I can't stay with him, but I can't afford to leave. Sarah leaned forward. There might be another option, but I need to do some more digging first. Can you give me 48 more hours? The confrontation came sooner than planned. Marcus had forgotten to log out of his iPad, the one synced to his messages. Rachel had picked it up to check the weather when the notification appeared. Sierra. Missing you already. Last night was incredible. When are you going to tell her? Marcus. Soon, after the baby comes. It'll be cleaner that way. Sierra. I hate sneaking around, but I love you too much to stop. Marcus. Love you too. Real love, not the obligatory kind. Obligatory. 7 years reduced to an obligation. Rachel was sitting in the living room when Marcus came home, the iPad on the coffee table between them like evidence at a trial. He saw it and stopped, his face cycling through expressions, surprise, guilt, calculation, and finally condescension. Rachel, he started, using the voice he employed with difficult investors. You don't understand the full picture. Then enlighten me, she said, her lawyer voice returning like muscle memory. Explain how accidentally falling in love with your employee while your wife is pregnant is actually a complex business strategy I'm too hormonal to understand. Marcus loosened his tie and sat down, maintaining the careful distance of opposing counsel. You changed after you got pregnant. Everything became about the baby. We haven't been us for months. We haven't been us since you started sleeping with Sierra. It's not just sex. He had the audacity to look offended. She understands my vision. She challenges me intellectually. You gave up your career, Rachel. You became less. The words hit like physical blows. I gave up my career because you asked me to. You said the company needed me to be the face of the family-friendly CEO's wife for investors. And you were perfect at it. But that's all you became, a perfect wife. Sierra is a partner. Rachel stood, her hands cradling her belly. A partner you're embezzling from the company to support. Oh, I know about the fraud, Marcus, the Ponzi scheme, the fake Tokyo deal. His face went pale, then red with rage. You've been investigating me? How dare you? How dare I? You're stealing from our company to pay your mistress's rent. Marcus stood too, towering over her. Be very careful, Rachel. You have no idea what you're playing with. I control everything, the money, the assets, the narrative. If you try to divorce me, I'll bury you. You'll be a broke single mother with a ruined reputation. Is that what you want for our child? Our child deserves a father who isn't a criminal. Marcus laughed cold and sharp. Prove it. Everything's in my name or hidden behind the shell companies. You signed away your rights when you got pregnant. Face it, Rachel, you need me. Without me, you're nothing." She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" he called after her. "To become something again." Rachel drove to her Aunt Patricia's house in Westchester, the only family she had left. Patricia Morgan was a successful divorce attorney who'd warned Rachel about the prenup years ago. She took one look at her niece's face and opened her arms. That night, lying in the guest bedroom of her aunt's colonial, Rachel felt the baby having hiccups. She rubbed her belly in slow circles, humming a lullaby her mother had sung before the cancer took her. Tomorrow she would file for divorce. Tomorrow she would fight for her child's future, even if she had to do it with nothing but determination and $200,000. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Check your email now." Rachel opened her laptop, connecting to her aunt's Wi-Fi. The email was from a law firm she'd never heard of, Blackstone, Reeves and Associates. "Dear Ms. Rachel Whitman, we regret to inform you of the passing of your biological father, Mr. Jonathan Blackstone. As his sole heir, you are requested to attend the reading of his will at our offices tomorrow at 10 a.m. Rachel read it 3 times before the words made sense. Her father had died when she was 2. Her mother had told her stories about the struggling artist who'd passed away from a heart attack. There had never been any mention of anyone named Jonathan Blackstone. She Googled the name and nearly dropped her laptop. Jonathan Blackstone, pharmaceutical billionaire, net worth $8.7 billion. Founded Blackstone Pharma after developing a revolutionary cancer treatment. Reclusive, never married, no known children, except apparently for her. The offices of Blackstone, Reeves and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a building on Park Avenue that Rachel had walked past 1,000 times without knowing it would change her life. She sat in a conference room that could have fit her entire apartment, her Aunt Patricia beside her for legal support. The senior partner, William Blackstone, no relation, he assured her, was a distinguished black man in his 70s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Ms. Whitman, I know this must come as quite a shock," he began, sliding a thick folder across the mahogany table. "Your mother, Jennifer Sullivan, worked as a research assistant at Johns Hopkins in the early 1980s. That's where she met Jonathan Blackstone. They had a brief but intense relationship." He showed her a photograph, a young woman who looked remarkably like Rachel standing next to a handsome man in a lab coat. They were smiling, clearly in love. "What happened?" Rachel asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jonathan's father, Theodore Blackstone, was a powerful man with specific ideas about bloodlines and family legacy. When he discovered Jonathan was involved with someone he considered beneath their social status, he intervened. He threatened to destroy Jennifer's career, to have her blacklisted from every research institution in the country, but that wasn't enough to separate them. William pulled out another document. So Theodore did something crueler. He fabricated evidence that Jennifer had been cheating, made it look like the child she was carrying wasn't Jonathan's. He even produced fake DNA tests, easy enough to do when you own several laboratories. Rachel's hands shook as she read the old papers. Jonathan believed it? He was 24, idealistic, and his father was a master manipulator. By the time Jonathan learned the truth, Jennifer had disappeared. She'd changed her name, moved across the country, started a new life. She never told you who your real father was to protect you from the Blackstone influence. How did Jonathan find out? His father confessed on his deathbed 5 years ago. Jonathan spent the next 3 years searching for you, but your mother had been thorough in covering her tracks. He finally found you 2 years ago. William's voice softened. He's been watching from afar, Miss Whitman. He knew about your career, your marriage, your pregnancy. He wanted to reach out, but he was terrified of disrupting your life. So why now? Because he's dead, William said simply. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 6 months ago. He spent his final months rewriting his will, ensuring you would inherit everything. The company, the estates, the entire fortune. But there's a complication. Of course there was. What kind of complication? The will contains a morality clause. Any significant scandal that brings disrepute to the Blackstone name in the first year could invalidate the inheritance. It was meant to protect against fortune hunters and ensure stable leadership transition at Blackstone Pharma. Rachel laughed bitterly. I'm in the middle of divorcing my husband for adultery and fraud. I'd say that qualifies as a scandal. Patricia spoke up for the first time. Actually, that could work in our favor. Marcus is the one committing adultery and fraud. Rachel is the victim here. True, William agreed, but these things can be spun. If Mr. Whitman decides to make this divorce contentious, if he makes accusations public, he already has. Rachel pulled out her phone, showing them a series of texts Marcus had sent that morning. He's claiming I'm having a mental breakdown, that the pregnancy has made me delusional. He's threatening to seek full custody. William's expression hardened. Then we need to act fast. The estate includes a preliminary disbursement of $50 million for immediate needs while the full transfer is processed. I can have that in your account by end of business today. $50 million. The number didn't feel real. There's more, William continued. Jonathan left you something personal. He handed her a sealed envelope with her name written in careful script. Inside was a letter and a flash drive. My dear Rachel, the letter began, if you're reading this, then my cowardice has outlasted my life. I should have fought for you and your mother. I should have stood up to my father. Instead, I let pride and family obligation rob me of the only real love I ever knew. I've watched you from afar, and you've become everything I hoped. Brilliant, compassionate, strong. Stronger than I ever was. The flash drive contains evidence that might help you understand the full scope of what was taken from us. It also contains something that might help you with your current situation. Your mother never knew, but I kept tabs on everyone who wronged us. Marcus Whitman is not who he appears to be. His father, Gregory Whitman, was my father's lawyer, the architect of the lie that separated us. The sins of the fathers, it seems, have found their way to the sons. Use what I've left you not for revenge, but for justice. Build the life you deserve, the life I should have fought to give you. With all the love I never got to express, your father, Jonathan. Rachel inserted the flash drive into William's laptop. File after file appeared, documents, recordings, photographs. One folder was labeled Gregory Whitman, Crimes. Another was labeled Marcus Whitman, Truth. She opened the second folder and gasped. The files on Marcus were devastating. His father, Gregory, had built the family fortune through a pattern of blackmail and extortion, using his law practice to gather dirt on wealthy clients and then leveraging it for profit. Marcus hadn't fallen far from the tree. His company's success was built on stolen intellectual property and fraudulent patents. But the most shocking revelation was about Sierra Cross. She's Gregory Whitman's illegitimate daughter. Rachel read from a DNA test dated 3 years ago. Marcus's half-sister. Patricia nearly choked on her coffee. He's having an affair with his half-sister? He doesn't know, William said, studying the documents. Gregory paid off Sierra's mother to keep quiet, but it seems Jonathan tracked down the truth. The question is, what do you want to do with this information? Rachel stood, pacing to the window. Below, Manhattan sprawled in all its ambition and cruelty. I want to protect my child. I want to ensure Marcus never has the power to hurt us again. But I don't want to destroy him with this. It would destroy Sierra too. And she doesn't know the truth either. You're more merciful than most would be, William observed. I'm about to be a mother. I can't begin that journey with cruelty, even if it's justified. She turned back to them. Can we use the financial crimes without revealing the rest? We can, but it might not be enough. Marcus has good lawyers, and if he spins this right... Rachel's phone rang. It was Sarah. Rachel, where are you? Marcus just had the locks changed on the apartment. He's claiming abandonment and filing for an emergency custody order. He's saying you're mentally unstable and a danger to the baby. Rachel felt her knees buckle. Patricia caught her arm, guiding her to a chair. Furthermore, Sarah continued, someone leaked to the press that you're Jonathan Blackstone's heir. The story's everywhere. Marcus is giving a press conference in an hour, and I don't think it's going to be flattering. William was already pulling up news sites on his laptop. The headlines were brutal. Billionaire heiress abandons husband while pregnant. Secret fortune revealed in messy divorce. Tech CEO fights for custody against unstable wife. Marcus had struck first, and he'd struck hard. We need to respond, Patricia said, her lawyer instincts kicking in. We need to control the narrative. No, Rachel said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Let him talk. Let him hang himself with his own words. William, can you get me that 50 million today? Within 3 hours. Good. And I need you to set up a meeting with the board of Blackstone Pharma for tomorrow. If I'm going to inherit this company, they need to know who I am before Marcus defines me. She stood, her hand on her belly. The baby was unusually still, as if sensing the gravity of the moment. What are you planning? Patricia asked. I'm not going to fight Marcus in the court of public opinion. I'm going to give him exactly what he thinks he wants. A weak, broken wife who needs his mercy. And while he's gloating, I'm going to dismantle everything he's built. That afternoon, while Marcus held his press conference, portraying himself as the devoted husband, trying to help his mentally fragile pregnant wife, Rachel sat in a different conference room with Sarah and a team of forensic accountants William had assembled. The Ponzi scheme is more extensive than we thought, the lead accountant explained. He's been creating shell companies, filing fake patents, and using new investments to create the illusion of profits. The whole thing is maybe 6 weeks from collapse. What would accelerate it, Rachel asked. A major investor pulling out, or someone reporting it to the SEC with evidence. Rachel smiled for the first time in days. I'm a 30% owner of the company. What if I requested an emergency audit? That would trigger an immediate investigation. Do it, but not yet. Give me 1 week. She turned to Sarah. I need you to do something that might seem strange. I need you to go to Marcus and tell him I hired you to investigate him. Tell him everything you found. Make him think you're willing to sell me out for the right price. Sarah's eyes widened. You want me to be a double agent? I want you to be a triple agent. He needs to believe he's won, that he has eyes on my every move. Can you do it? Sarah grinned mid. Rachel, I've been waiting my whole career to do something this dramatic. The plan worked better than expected. Sarah approached Marcus that evening at his office, playing the part of the disillusioned friend perfectly. She's lost it, Marcus, Sarah said, secretly recording everything. The pregnancy, finding out about the affair, this inheritance. She's completely unstable. She hired me to dig up dirt on you, but honestly, I'm worried about her mental state. Marcus leaned back in his chair, trying to look concerned rather than triumphant. I've been worried too. How much has she told you about her episodes? Episodes? Sarah played along. The paranoia, the accusations. Last week, she accused our housekeeper of spying on her. She's been saying everyone's out to get her. Classic pregnancy psychosis. It was a lie so smooth that if Sarah hadn't known the truth, she might have believed it. What do you want from me? Sarah asked. Just keep me informed about what she's doing. Help me protect her from herself. And of course, I'll compensate you for your time. Say, 50,000 a week. Sarah pretended to consider it. Make it 75 and you have a deal. They shook hands, and Sarah became Rachel's secret weapon inside Marcus's camp. Meanwhile, Rachel played her part flawlessly. She sent Marcus tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness, saying she was confused and scared. She had Patricia reach out to his lawyers, suggesting she might be willing to sign anything to make peace. She even went to his office, visibly pregnant and seemingly broken, asking if they could work things out. I don't know what came over me, she said, tears streaming down her face. The hormones, the stress. I've been having these thoughts that don't make sense. Maybe you're right. Maybe I need help. Marcus held her, and she forced herself not to recoil from his touch. Over his shoulder, she could see Sarah watching from her office, guilt written across her face. I just want what's best for you and the baby, Marcus said, pulling back to look at her. Sign the custody agreement. Let me take care of everything while you get the help you need. Can I have a few days to think about it? Of course. But Rachel, this inheritance, you know it comes with complications. The board at Blackstone Pharma will never accept you as CEO. You should designate someone else to manage it. Someone you trust. Like you? His eyes gleamed. If you think that's best. She left his office looking defeated, but in the elevator, she allowed herself a small smile. He'd taken the bait. The next morning, Rachel stood before the board of Blackstone Pharma. 12 executives, mostly men over 60, sat around a gleaming conference table looking skeptical. She was obviously pregnant, obviously young, and according to the news, obviously unstable. Gentlemen and ladies, she began, noting the two women present. I know what you've heard about me. I know what my husband has been telling the press. I'm here to tell you the truth. She clicked a remote, and a presentation appeared on the screen behind her. My name is Rachel Whitman, formerly Rachel Sullivan. I graduated summa cum laude from Stanford, earned my JD from Harvard Law, and was on track to become the youngest female partner at Kirkland & Ellis before I chose to support my husband's entrepreneurial ambitions. Click. Her credentials appeared. What you may not know is that I've been conducting a forensic analysis of my husband's company, where I am a 30% owner. Click. Financial documents appeared. His company is a Ponzi scheme, 6 weeks from collapse. He's been using my name and my reputation to secure investments while conducting an affair with his VP of operations. Click. The evidence appeared, damning and undeniable. Now you might wonder why I'm telling you this. Because Blackstone Pharma has been considering a partnership with my husband's company for their patient data management system. I'm here to tell you that would be a catastrophic mistake. The board members shifted uncomfortably. But more than that, I'm here to show you who I really am. Not the broken wife Marcus Whitman describes, but the woman who uncovered his fraud while 7 months pregnant and fighting for my child's future. The woman who, despite inheriting $8.7 billion, took the time to protect this company from a bad investment. She clicked again. This is my 90-day plan for Blackstone Pharma. I've identified 3 areas of immediate improvement, 7 unnecessary expenditures, and 12 potential growth opportunities in emerging markets. For the next hour, she presented her vision with the same precision she'd once used in closing arguments. When she finished, the room was silent. Finally, the chairman, an elderly man named Harrison Pike, spoke. Ms. Whitman, this is impressive, but what about your personal situation? My personal situation is that I'm divorcing a criminal who happens to be talented at public relations. By next week, he'll be under federal investigation. I'd rather you judge me by my actions than his words. Harrison nodded slowly. We'll take this under advisement. Rachel left the building knowing she'd won them over. But as she reached the sidewalk, her phone rang. It was Sarah, and she sounded panicked. Rachel, abort the plan, abort everything. What? Wait, Marcus knows. He knows about your father, about the evidence, about everything. Someone leaked it to him. Who? Patricia, your Aunt Patricia. Rachel felt the world tilt. She grabbed a nearby wall for support, her free hand protecting her body as Braxton Hicks' contractions rippled through her. That's impossible, she breathed into the phone. Patricia's been my lawyer, my family. Marcus has been paying off her gambling debts for 2 years, Sarah said quickly. $300,000. She came to him when you first got married, and he's been holding it over her ever since. Rachel, I'm so sorry. I just found out. Rachel's mind raced. Every conversation with Patricia, every strategy session, every piece of evidence she'd shared, Marcus knew it all. Where are you? Sarah asked. Outside Blackstone Pharma. I just met with the board. Get out of there. Marcus filed an emergency injunction. He's claiming you're using your pregnancy psychosis to manipulate a multi-billion-dollar company. He has Patricia's testimony that you've been having delusions. There's a warrant to bring you in for psychiatric evaluation. Rachel saw the police cars before she heard the sirens. 3 units pulled up to the building, officers stepping out with the careful movements of people expecting trouble. She couldn't run. 7 months pregnant, she could barely walk fast. Instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She called William Blackstone and put him on speaker. William, I'm about to be detained. I need you to. Rachel Whitman, an officer approached, his hand resting on his belt, but not his weapon. We need you to come with us. Officer, I'm represented by counsel, she said calmly, her lawyer training overriding her panic. Am I under arrest? No, ma'am. We have a court order for emergency psychiatric evaluation based on concerns for your welfare and the welfare of your unborn child. William, she said to the phone, are you getting this? Every word. Don't resist, Rachel. We'll have you out within hours. But it wasn't hours. It was 3 days. The psychiatric hold was a masterstroke of manipulation. Marcus had presented carefully edited videos of Rachel's emotional moments, Patricia's false testimony about paranoid episodes, and Sarah's supposed confession that Rachel had hired her to fabricate evidence against him. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the court-appointed psychiatrist, was a careful woman who took her time with the evaluation. Rachel knew she was being watched, analyzed, every word scrutinized for signs of instability. She stayed calm, answered questions honestly, and refused to give them what they wanted. A pregnant woman breaking down. "Your husband says you believe he's running a criminal enterprise," Dr. Hendricks said during one session. "I have documented evidence of financial fraud," Rachel replied evenly. "That's not a delusion, it's a fact that will be proven in court. He also says you've been claiming to be the secret heir to a pharmaceutical fortune. Again, documented fact. You can call William Blackstone at Blackstone, Reeves & Associates to confirm." Dr. Hendricks made notes. "You seem remarkably calm for someone whose husband is having an affair." "Doctor, I'm a trained litigator. I learned long ago that emotion clouds judgment. My husband's infidelity is painful, but it doesn't make me psychotic." On the third day, William arrived with a court order for her release and a team of the best lawyers money could buy. But the damage was done. The media had run with the story. Billionaire heiress hospitalized for psych evaluation. Pregnant wife's mental break. Tech CEO fights for unborn child safety. Marcus had won the narrative battle. But Rachel was about to win the war. She was released on a Thursday afternoon, exhausted but unbroken. William drove her to a safe house, not her aunt's, obviously, but a secure apartment his firm maintained for sensitive clients. "The board of Blackstone Pharma wants to delay the inheritance transfer," he said once they were inside. "The publicity has them concerned." "Of course it does." Rachel sank onto the couch, her back aching. "How long?" "Indefinitely, unless something changes dramatically." Rachel closed her eyes. She was 8 months pregnant, homeless, publicly humiliated, and fighting a husband who seemed to be 3 steps ahead at every turn. Most people would give up, but Rachel wasn't most people. "Sarah," she said, pulling out her phone, "are you still playing double agent?" "Triple agent, remember? Marcus trusts me completely. He thinks I'm keeping tabs on you." "Good. Tell him I want to meet. Tell him I'm ready to sign whatever he wants. Full custody, power of attorney over the inheritance, everything." "Rachel, no. Trust me. And Sarah, this time actually record everything." The meeting was set for that evening at Marcus's office. Rachel arrived looking exactly as defeated as he expected. Tired, disheveled, her pregnancy weighing her down. Patricia was there too, unable to meet Rachel's eyes. "I'm glad you're being reasonable," Marcus said, sliding papers across his desk. "This is what's best for everyone." Rachel picked up the pen, then paused. "Before I sign, I need to know something. Was any of it real? Did you ever love me?" Marcus sighed, playing the part of the conflicted husband. "Of course I loved you, Rachel. I still do, in a way. But you changed. You became someone I didn't recognize." "When? When did I change?" "When you got pregnant. You became obsessed with the baby, with being perfect. You stopped being my partner and became just a mother." Rachel nodded slowly. "And Sierra, and when did that start?" Marcus glanced at Patricia, who nodded encouragingly. He thought he was safe, surrounded by his allies. "It wasn't planned," he said. "She understood the pressure I was under. She didn't judge me for the things I had to do to keep the company afloat." "What things?" Rachel asked softly. "You know, the creative financing, the investor management. Sometimes you have to sell a vision before it's real. You wouldn't understand. Try me." And he did. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus explained his fraud in detail, thinking he was talking to his broken, defeated wife who was about to sign away her rights. He admitted to the Ponzi scheme, the embezzlement, even the plan to use Rachel's inheritance to cover the shortfalls. "It's not really stealing," he justified. "It's just moving money around until the company succeeds. And it will succeed once I have the Blackstone resources." "And if I don't sign?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Then I'll make sure you never see our child. I'll prove you're unstable. I have Patricia's testimony, Sarah's cooperation, the psychiatric hold. No judge will give custody to a woman who was hospitalized for psychosis." Rachel stood, her hand protectively over her belly. You're right. You win. She reached for the pen, then stopped. Oh, there's just one thing. What? Rachel pulled out her phone and held it up. The screen showed an active live stream to the SEC's official reporting portal with over 3,000 viewers and climbing. This entire conversation has been broadcasting live to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, and thanks to some quick social media work by a friend, several major financial news outlets. The color drained from Marcus's face. He lunged for the phone, but Rachel stepped back. You just confessed to federal crimes in front of thousands of witnesses, Marcus. You're done. The authorities arrived within minutes. Marcus was arrested on charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and running a Ponzi scheme. The live stream had gone viral, the pregnant wife's ultimate revenge on her criminal husband. But Rachel didn't stick around to watch him being led away in handcuffs. She was too busy dealing with the fact that her water had just broken. Sarah rushed her to Mount Sinai Hospital while the contractions intensified. The stress of the past weeks, the confrontation, the adrenaline crash, it had all triggered labor 2 weeks early. Don't you dare have this baby in my car, Sarah muttered, weaving through Manhattan traffic. Tell that to the baby, Rachel gasped through a contraction. The next 18 hours were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and determination. Rachel refused all visitors except Sarah and William, who paced the waiting room like expectant grandfathers. She didn't want anyone else to see her vulnerable, especially not with Marcus's arrest playing on every news channel. At 4:47 a.m., after one final exhausting push, her daughter entered the world. It's a girl, the doctor announced, placing the screaming infant on Rachel's chest. Rachel looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt something she hadn't experienced in months, pure, uncomplicated joy. Hello, beautiful girl, she whispered. I'm your mama, and you're safe. You're finally safe. Sarah was allowed in after they'd cleaned up the baby and moved Rachel to a recovery room. She's perfect, Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. What are you going to name her? Rachel had thought about this moment throughout the pregnancy, back when she'd believed she was having a boy who would carry on the Sterling legacy. But now, holding her daughter, she knew exactly what to name her. Elizabeth, she said. Elizabeth Jennifer Blackstone. After my mother's middle name and the family name that should have been ours all along. No Sterling? Never Sterling. The news of the baby's birth competed with Marcus's arrest for headlines. Billionaire Heiress gives birth hours after husband's arrest. Baby Blackstone born into scandal and fortune. Tech moguls fall from grace complete. But the media attention took an unexpected turn when the full story emerged. The livestream confession had captured more than just Marcus's crimes. It had shown Rachel's composure, intelligence, and strategic brilliance in the face of abuse and betrayal. Public opinion shifted overnight. She wasn't the unstable pregnant wife anymore. She was the hero who'd brought down a corporate criminal while 8 months pregnant. William arrived the next morning with good news. The board of Blackstone Pharma held an emergency meeting. After seeing how you handled Marcus, they've approved the full inheritance transfer. They want you as CEO as soon as you're ready. Rachel looked at Elizabeth sleeping in the hospital bassinet. I'll need some maternity leave first. Take all the time you need. The companies have been waiting 35 years for a Blackstone to return. A few more months won't hurt. Patricia came by that afternoon. Rachel had asked security not to let her in, but Patricia had waited in the hallway for 6 hours until Rachel finally agreed to see her. Her aunt looked like she'd aged a decade in 3 days. I don't expect forgiveness. Good, Rachel interrupted, because you won't get it. I was desperate. The gambling debts, they were going to take my house, my practice. Marcus offered to help, and by the time I realized the cost, you chose your house over your pregnant niece. There's nothing more to say. Rachel, please. You're the only family I have left. Rachel looked at her aunt, the woman who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd been her maid of honor, who'd held her while she cried over her mother's grave. You were the only family I had left too, Rachel said quietly, and you sold me to Marcus for $300,000. That's what our relationship was worth to you. Patricia left in tears. Rachel felt nothing. She'd cried all her tears for betrayal already. She had no more left to give. Sierra Cross came by the next day, looking haggard and uncertain. I know you probably don't want to see me, Sierra began. You're right, but I'm curious enough to give you 5 minutes. Sierra sat down carefully as if the chair might explode. I didn't know he was married when it started. He told me you were separated, that the marriage was just for appearances until after the IPE. And when you found out the truth, I was already in too deep. I loved him, or thought I did. Sierra pulled out an envelope. This is my resignation from the company and a full confession of my role in the financial fraud. I'm testifying against him in exchange for immunity. Rachel took the envelope. Why are you really here, Sierra? To warn you. Marcus's father, Gregory, he's not done. He has connections, resources. He's going to come after the Blackstone fortune. He thinks it belongs to Marcus as compensation for what your father did to his family. Rachel smiled coldly. Let him try. She knew something Sierra didn't. The DNA test results that would destroy Gregory Whitman if he pushed too hard. But that was a card she'd only play if absolutely necessary. 6 months later, Rachel stood in the boardroom of Blackstone Pharma, Elizabeth sleeping in a bassinet beside her. She was addressing the senior leadership team about the company's new direction. We're not just going to develop life-saving drugs, she said, clicking through her presentation. We're going to ensure they're accessible. Every patent we hold will include provisions for affordable, generic versions in developing nations. We're going to be the first pharmaceutical company that puts lives before profits. That's admirable, one board member said carefully. But the shareholders will be fine, Rachel interrupted. We're going to make money by being ethical, not despite it. The publicity alone from our new initiatives will drive stock prices higher than any price gouging ever could. She was right. Within 3 months, Blackstone Pharma's stock had increased by 30%. The company's new malaria vaccine, distributed at cost in Africa, generated so much goodwill that their other products saw increased market share globally. Rachel had moved into the Blackstone estate in Connecticut, a massive compound that felt more like a small university than a home. She'd converted one wing into a workspace where she could run the company while caring for Elizabeth. The nursery overlooked gardens that Jonathan had planted but never seen bloom. Marcus's trial was a media sensation. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. During the sentencing, he'd looked at Rachel across the courtroom with such hatred that the bailiff had stepped closer to her protectively. You destroyed me, he'd mouthed. You destroyed yourself, she'd mouthed back. Gregory Whitman had indeed tried to challenge the inheritance, claiming Jonathan Blackstone had been mentally incompetent when he changed his will. The case went nowhere. William had been meticulous in documenting Jonathan's mental capacity, but Gregory didn't give up. He hired private investigators to dig into Rachel's past, looking for anything to discredit her. He spread rumors in business circles that she was unstable, that she'd manipulated a dying man. Rachel let him exhaust himself, tilting at windmills. She had bigger concerns. Elizabeth was thriving, a happy baby who had her mother's eyes and, Rachel suspected, her grandfather's brilliant mind. She was already intensely curious about everything, grabbing at instruments during her pediatric checkups, studying faces with unnerving focus. Sarah had become Elizabeth's godmother and Rachel's head of security for Blackstone Pharma. From investigating cheating husbands to protecting a pharmaceutical empire, she joked. Quite the career pivot. One evening, as Rachel was putting Elizabeth to bed, her phone rang with an unknown number. Hello, Rachel. The voice was gravelly, aged. Gregory Whitman. Gregory, I wondered when you'd call directly. You have something that belongs to my family. I have something that belongs to my daughter. Your family's involvement with mine ended when you destroyed my parents' relationship. You don't know the whole story. I know enough. Do you know that your father destroyed my brother's company, that his patents were built on research he stole, that my family's fortune should have been billions, not millions? Rachel had heard this story from William. Jonathan had indeed competed with Gregory's brother, but the research was legitimately his. The Whitmans had lost in court 40 years ago and never recovered. Your brother lost a legitimate competition. That doesn't entitle you to my inheritance. Maybe not, but it entitles me to justice. His voice turned menacing. You should be very careful, Rachel. You have a daughter now. The world is a dangerous place for little girls with big trust funds. The threat was clear. Rachel's hand tightened on the phone. "Gregory," she said, her voice deadly calm, "I need you to listen very carefully. I know about Sierra." Silence. "I know she's your daughter, Marcus's half-sister. I have the DNA tests, the birth certificate, the payoffs to her mother. One word from me, and Marcus learns he's been sleeping with his sister. The media would have a field day. The Whitman name would become synonymous with scandal. You're bluffing." "I'm not. But more importantly, I'm not afraid of you. I've been threatened by powerful men my entire life. My grandfather, my husband, now you. You all think money and connections make you untouchable. But I have more money, better connections, and unlike you, I have nothing to lose and everything to fight for." She paused, letting the words sink in. "If you come near my daughter, if you so much as drive past our home, I will destroy you. Not your fortune. You. I will ensure that your legacy is nothing but shame and scandal. Do we understand each other?" There was a long pause, then Gregory said, "You're more like your father than you know." "No," Rachel replied, "I'm stronger." She hung up and went back to Elizabeth's nursery, where her daughter was sleeping peacefully. She touched the baby's soft cheek and made a promise. "You will never have to fight these battles, my love. I'll fight them all for you." 5 years passed. Elizabeth grew into a brilliant, confident child who spoke 3 languages and could already read at a third-grade level. Rachel had built Blackstone Pharma into the most ethical and profitable pharmaceutical company in the world, pioneering treatments that had saved millions of lives. The Blackstone Foundation, which she'd established with part of her inheritance, funded education for underprivileged children, focusing on single mothers pursuing careers in STEM fields. She'd named it after her mother, not her father, the Jennifer Sullivan Foundation for Women's Excellence. Marcus had been released early for good behavior after serving 4 years. He'd tried to rebuild his life, starting a small consulting firm, but his reputation preceded him everywhere. The tech world had a long memory for spectacular failures. He'd petitioned for visitation rights with Elizabeth, claiming he'd reformed, found religion, wanted to be a father. Rachel had sat through the family court hearings, listening to his performance of redemption. The judge had looked at the evidence, the confession, the fraud, the emotional abuse, and made a decision. "Mr. Whitman, while I believe in the possibility of redemption, the safety and well-being of the child must come first. You may have supervised visits once a month for 2 hours pending regular psychological evaluations." Marcus had to pay for the supervision himself. He couldn't afford it. Rachel didn't gloat. She took no pleasure in his downfall anymore. He was simply irrelevant to her life. On Elizabeth's 5th birthday, they held a party at the Connecticut estate. Not the elaborate affairs Marcus would have insisted on, but a genuine celebration with close friends and their children. Sarah was there with her new wife and adopted son. William Blackstone, now retired but still a regular presence in their lives, played grandfather to all the children. Even Patricia was there. It had taken 3 years, but Rachel had finally forgiven her aunt, not for Patricia's sake, but for her own. Holding on to anger was exhausting, and she wanted Elizabeth to know her remaining family. Patricia had proven herself through years of humility and genuine reform, volunteering at addiction centers and speaking publicly about the dangers of gambling. As the party wound down and the sun set over the estate, Rachel stood on the same terrace where Jonathan had once stood, looking out at the legacy he had left behind. Elizabeth ran up, grabbing her hand. "Mama, can we see the stars tonight?" "Of course, sweetheart." They lay on the grass, looking up at the darkening sky. Elizabeth pointed out constellations she'd learned from her science books, chattering excitedly about space and planets and the possibility of life on other worlds. "Mama," Elizabeth said suddenly, "why don't I have a daddy like other kids?" Rachel had been preparing for this question for years, but it still caught her breath. "You do have a daddy," she said carefully, "but he made some bad choices, and it's not safe for you to see him right now." "Will it ever be safe?" "I don't know, baby. Maybe when you're older, if you want to meet him, we can figure out a way." "Did you love him?" Rachel considered lying, giving her daughter the comfortable fiction that she was conceived in love. But she'd promised herself she'd never lie to Elizabeth the way she'd been lied to. "I thought I did, but real love doesn't hurt people the way he hurt us." Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, sweetheart. more than all the stars in the sky. As they lay there, Rachel thought about the journey that had brought them here, the betrayal that had shattered her, the inheritance that had saved her, the battles she'd fought and won, the empire she'd built from the ashes of her marriage. But mostly she thought about the future. Elizabeth would inherit all of this one day, the fortune, the company, the responsibility. But unlike Rachel, she wouldn't inherit it from a stranger's guilt. She would inherit it from a mother's love. Already knowing who she was and where she came from, Rachel's phone buzzed with a text from the board. Another acquisition opportunity, another chance to expand their reach and save more lives. She ignored it. Work could wait. Right now, she was exactly where she needed to be, lying on the grass with her daughter, counting stars and building a legacy that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with love. "Mama," Elizabeth said sleepily, "will you tell me a story?" "What kind of story?" "About a brave princess who saves herself." Rachel smiled. "Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought she needed a prince to save her. But she learned that the only person who could save her was herself." As she told the story, their story, disguised as a fairy tale, Elizabeth fell asleep against her shoulder. Rachel carried her inside, thinking about Jonathan, the father she never knew, who had watched from afar but never reached out. She understood him now, understood the fear of disrupting a life, the paralysis of regret. But she also understood that love required courage, not perfection. In the morning, she would run a billion-dollar company. She would make decisions that affected millions of lives. She would continue building an empire that would outlast them all. But tonight, she was just a mother holding her daughter, finally home in a life she'd built with her own hands. The Blackstone legacy would continue, but it would be different now. It would be built on truth, not lies, on strength, not fear, on love, not obligation. And that made all the difference. 10 years later, a 15-year-old Elizabeth Blackstone stood before the same board of directors her mother had once faced. She was there as part of a school project, shadowing her mother for a day. "My mother," Elizabeth said with the confidence Rachel recognized as her own, "taught me that money is just a tool. What matters is how you use it." Rachel watched from the back of the room, remembering another young woman who had stood in the same spot, pregnant and betrayed but unbroken. After the presentation, as they walked to the car, Elizabeth asked, "Mom, do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad hadn't cheated? If you'd never inherited all this?" Rachel considered the question. In another life, she might still be Mrs. Sterling, hosting dinner parties, living a beautiful lie. She would never have known her own strength, never have built this empire, never have become the woman she was meant to be. "No," she said honestly, "I don't wonder. Everything that happened, as painful as it was, led us here, and here is exactly where we're supposed to be." Elizabeth nodded, wise beyond her years. "He wrote to me again." Marcus had been writing letters to Elizabeth for 5 years, letters Rachel screened but didn't hide. Elizabeth had never responded, but she read them all. What did he say? The usual. How proud he is, how sorry he is, how he's changed. Elizabeth looked at her mother. "Do you think people can really change?" Rachel thought of Gregory Whitman, who'd died bitter and alone, of Patricia, who'd rebuilt her life and relationships, of herself transformed from a dependent wife to an independent force of nature. "I think people can change," she said carefully. "But change requires acknowledging the harm you've caused and working to repair it, not just saying you're sorry." "He says he wants to meet me." Rachel's heart clenched, but she kept her voice steady. "You're old enough to make that decision. If you want to meet him, we'll arrange it safely." Elizabeth shook her head. "Not yet, maybe not ever. I have everything I need." As they drove home to the estate, Rachel thought about the story she'd told Elizabeth all those years ago, about the brave princess who saved herself. But she'd gotten it wrong. It wasn't just about saving herself. It was about saving her daughter from ever needing to be saved at all. The sun set behind them as they drove, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Somewhere in federal prison, Marcus Sterling was probably writing another letter. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, Sierra Cross was running her own company, having learned hard lessons about integrity. Somewhere in the city, Patricia was counseling another gambling addict. Everyone had ended up where their choices had led them. And Rachel? Rachel had ended up exactly where she was meant to be. Not as the billionaire heiress, the headlines proclaimed, but as something far more valuable. A mother who'd turned her greatest betrayal into her daughter's greatest blessing. The Blackstone billions were just numbers and accounts. The real fortune was in the car beside her, singing along to the radio, growing into a woman who would never settle for less than she deserved. That was Rachel's true revenge, her perfect justice, her lasting legacy. That was enough. That was everything.